Hello and welcome. My name is Beverly Popek, and I'm a supervising compliance officer at the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement, City and County of San Francisco. Our office is here to help you understand your labor compliance requirements. This presentation is part one of a series, and it will provide an overview of citywide and contract labor laws for profits and nonprofits. Again, this is a presentation for-profit and nonprofit companies who have a contract or contracts with the City and County of San Francisco. If you're a nonprofit grantee, meaning you have a grant contract or you're planning to have a grant contract with us, please watch the video one or part one, Citywide and Contract Labor Laws for Nonprofit Grantees. Now, this presentation is geared to companies who have an agreement or plan to have an agreement with the City and County of San Francisco. By an agreement, this may mean a contract for service, lease, permit, etc. If you are involved in proposal preparation, certainly watch this video, but you should have your human resources, benefits, and or operations units help you understand your organization's current compliance status before you put together a proposal, as you need to factor in the cost of compliance into your budget and proposal with the city. This presentation is part one of a series of three videos that's going to provide a great overview and information so you can create a list of relevant labor laws for your company. I recommend that you watch the videos in order. Print the slides that accompany each video to follow along, take notes, and in some places, you'll be able to check off boxes to create a customized list of laws. In the City and County of San Francisco, we have two major types of labor laws, citywide and contract. Citywide labor laws are required for all businesses who operate and have employees in the City and County of San Francisco. Contract labor laws are required for companies who have a contract with us. A contract can be a contract for services where you are getting paid to provide services for us. It can be a lease where you're renting space from us, a permit, etc. Now, before we dive into the labor laws, you're going to have to know what your employee count is to determine which labor laws are relevant to you. Your employee count is defined as all persons working for you anywhere in the world. It's that simple. Does it matter where your company's headquartered? The answer is no. It doesn't matter where your company is headquartered. Now, a little bit more background information before we get into all of these labor laws is that the City and County of San Francisco has a standard contract template and templates that's shared with prospective bidders and proposers at the time of solicitation. If you are part of the proposal or sales team that put together a response to our request for bidder proposals, you'll remember that the package was quite large and thick. That's because we're very open and transparent in having you understand not only the minimum requirements, the scope of work, but we included a copy of the contract that you would need to sign if you win, or in other words, if you were awarded the contract. The contract template has a lot of stuff in there, but what's important and relevant to us today is that it can provide you and it will provide you a list of labor laws or requirements that you must comply with per your contract with the City and County of San Francisco. These labor laws are applicable to your employees performing work on the contract in the United States. At the time of bid or proposal, your company should have reviewed all of the labor requirements relevant to the scope of work and your planned delivery. Ultimately, in your proposal, your price should have included the cost of compliance with the labor laws listed in the contract. In sum, the contract labor laws are required because you have a contract with the City and County of San Francisco. Now, covered employer and covered employees. For every labor law, you must determine if you're a covered employer. To determine if you're a covered employer, you must know your employee count. Once you have this information, you can figure out if you are a covered employer. After you know if you're a covered employer, you must ask yourself if you have any covered employees. The definition of who are these covered employees are defined in each labor law, and you will need to look that information up requirement by requirement. Now, for the next two slides, I'm going to go through the contract and citywide labor laws for for-profits. Nonprofits pay attention as the only information that is different is the employer size that would determine the healthcare accountability ordinance and healthcare security ordinance. Now, there's a lot of information here. It's very normal to be very overwhelmed, especially if you haven't seen this before. Now, for every labor law, remember, you first must determine if you are a covered employer. So let's take a look, starting from the left-hand side with the first box, where it says all employers. This simply means that all employers of any size needs to comply with the consideration of salary history. You will notice that there are check boxes next to the labor laws. That is put there so that you can check off the laws that you may need to comply with. And there's also room for you to take notes. So let's move over to the right. Employers with 5 employees or more, you should add the minimum compensation ordinance and the fair chance ordinance. There is information in the asterisk. Don't concern yourself with this right now. We are going to look at this information in our other videos that follow. Right now, what I want you to concern yourself with is thinking about, are you a covered employer, and starting to make this list. Moving on over to employers with 20 or more employees, you should add the healthcare accountability ordinance. Next, we have here all the way over to the right is that we have work-specific labor laws requirements. We have prevailing wage, 21C, and prevailing wage, Chapter 6. So you're for this particular column in terms of work specific, we're going to have you do some research and think about what type of services you're performing and if that work is falling under one of these prevailing wage laws. So don't worry about that right now. We're going to get to that in our next slides, and it's going to become more clear. You can put a question mark next to it. Now, let's turn our attention to the citywide labor laws. That was just contract. This slide shows you a list of all of our citywide labor laws. If you are performing work in the city and county of San Francisco, you will need to understand how to comply with these laws. And the logic is the same here. Depending on your employee count, you can clearly see which laws may apply to you. So for example, on the far left-hand side, employers of all sizes may need to comply with these 4 different ordinances. As we're moving over to the right, employers with 5 or more, you add the Fair Chance Ordinance, and employers with 20 or more employees, we add the Healthcare Security Ordinance, Paid Parental Leave, Family Friendly Workplace Ordinance. Now, there is information that is super important, but we are going to look at that at other videos, and that is regarding, well, which one would you comply with, the contract or the citywide? They look kind of similar in terms of requirements, but they're different. So just couch or park those questions right now, and you will get answers very shortly as you watch these videos. Now, turning our attention to information for nonprofits. So nonprofits, thanks for being patient. As mentioned before, the information that is really different here is that for the healthcare accountability ordinance, your employer threshold is 50 employees or more. So that is really what's different with the contract labor laws. Let's turn our attention to citywide labor laws for nonprofit. The only difference here would be that you need to be an employer with 50 or more, and maybe you have to comply with the healthcare security ordinance. Now, as I mentioned, this is the first determining factor of looking at how many employees do you have to figure out if you are a covered employer. And then from there, you can drill down to see if you have any covered employees, which is defined in each ordinance separately. Okay, so let's move on. Now that you've started your list at this point, you know your list is not complete. And by the end of the series, you really would have your list, a complete list, in addition to a roadmap of really defining your covered employees. And you can even add names to that. Now, you're probably wondering which laws do you have to comply with? We spoke about there's their contract and their citywide labor laws. And here is the method and how to determine whether to comply with which one. Ask yourself, does the contract law apply to you? If yes, then you need to learn more about the contract law and see if you are a covered employer. And if you are a covered employer, if you have any covered employees. So if the answer is yes, I'm a covered employer, yes, I have covered employees, then you must comply with that contract law. Now, backing up, if the contract law does not apply to you and you don't and you are operating in the city and county of San Francisco, then you need to move on down here to citywide labor laws to determine if, number one, you're a covered employer for any of these basic citywide labor laws. And if the answer is yes, who are those covered employees based upon the definition of covered employees? Under contract labor laws, there are two big categories of contract labor laws. And this information is going to help you determine this work-specific labor laws, which are fall under prevailing wage, Chapter 6 and Chapter 21C. And the two big categories would be prevailing wage, and the second category is minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. For a particular employee that's working in a contract, it's going to be one of these boxes, not both at the same time for that one particular employee. So that may not make sense right now, but you'll see in the coming slides what I mean by that. So if you're not sure where to start, if you've never heard about prevailing wage and any of this, you should start to check if the work you're performing under your contract is under prevailing wage. So what you need to do is you need to go to the OLSC website and see if that type of work falls under, first, prevailing wage chapter 6. And a big hint here or a tip is that prevailing wage chapter 6 has to do with construction. So if you are a company and your scope of services has nothing to do with construction, you probably will not have to comply with prevailing wage. But as I said, if you're not sure where to start and you've never heard and seen and understand prevailing wage, it's always a good look to review this very quickly. So Chapter 6 is construction, and then the other prevailing wage is Chapter 21C, non-construction. There is a list of miscellaneous types of work that would fall under Chapter 21C, as in Charlie, non-construction services. And we're going to get into some specific examples later, but examples that I can give you right now would be security guard services, window cleaning, janitorial services, to name a few. Now, if you go to the prevailing wage sections of our OLSC website, you're going to clearly figure out if your work falls under there. And if the answer is yes, you're going to have to comply with the prevailing wage requirements for employees performing that or those types of work. And then ultimately, you're going to want to figure out, well, who are the covered employees? So you're going to have to figure it out and you're going to have to make a list. So let's move on to what if the answer is no? You've checked the prevailing wage websites, or it's not under construction, it's not under this 21C prevailing wage, non-construction or miscellaneous stuff, well, then the work falls under the minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. And that is, you could check it if it doesn't have a list of what minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance covers. It's just whatever prevailing wage does not cover. So that's why you start with prevailing wage first. So if the answer is yes, that your work falls under minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance, determine if you are a covered employer. And then if it's yes, you got to figure out if you have any covered employees, and if so, who are they? Figure it out and make a list. Now, I know you've all been waiting for this particular slide. These are examples of work and the relevant labor laws. So let's take a look at these examples and discuss it. So let's get into construction work. If you have a contract with us to perform a type of construction work, for example, carpentry or masonry, the people working on the construction site, picking up the hammer, they fall under prevailing wage chapter 6. They're construction. Now, moving on to janitorial services or security guards, maybe that's your contract and what you have to do for the city and county and you're getting paid to do. These particular services or this type of work or these types of works would fall under prevailing wage chapter 21C, kind of the miscellaneous category. Moving on to the third bullet point, if you are performing some sort of administrative office work, counselors, consultants, architects, engineers, project managers are involved, then it falls under minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. And when I say falls, you're going to have to, number one, again, check if you're a covered employer, and if you are covered as an employer, who are your covered employees? And I don't know, you might not have any covered employees depending on the definition of the requirement and the law. So broadly speaking, always start with prevailing wage. What doesn't fall under prevailing wage will fall under the minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. I hope that helps. It usually helps employers quite a bit knowing that, so write that down. So let's get a little bit detailed and nuanced with some of the construction contracts. So theoretically, let's say I have a contract to do some construction work. It's very broadly speaking what construction work is, and carpentry is involved, and masonry is involved, and things like that. So my workers performing work on the construction site, um, the carpenters of all different classifications, the labor law for them would be prevailing wage, and it would be Chapter 6. Now, what if part of the scope of services in my construction contract, which is sounds so broad, it means that I am going to be also responsible for protecting or guarding the construction site. And in my contract, I have money to provide those security guards to protect the site. Then that particular type of service under construction, although it's a construction contract, but I'm providing security guards, the labor law for that type of work or that type of service is prevailing wage, Chapter 21C. Now, digging down further, my generic general construction work contract requires administrative work. It requires scheduling, construction managers, project managers, people in the office to submit certified payroll, which is a requirement of prevailing wage. And the Chapter 6 part. Well, the administrators, the office staff, the project managers, maybe I've hired an engineer to check the concrete, the density, or something like that. Well, all of these other people, that type of work doesn't fall under prevailing wage. It falls under minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. So with that one example, I've shown you how you may need to understand all these different types of labor laws. So in some, I need you to get organized, make a chart, make a list, and I'm going to give you some tips on later videos on how to do that. But this example is just to have you understand how this is all coming together and why you need to make a list to get started. So in some, which laws do you have to comply with? Prevailing wage or minimum compensation ordinance? If you really don't know, you should always start with prevailing wage first. It is work specific where it's construction or kind of a miscellaneous non-construction. Go to the prevailing wage web pages and you will see what those works are, what those types of jobs might be. If the answer is yes, it falls under prevailing wage, then follow prevailing wage. But for all other employees performing work for the city and county contract that performs work that's not under prevailing wage, then you really need to look at the minimum compensation and healthcare accountability ordinance. And there you're going to have to look, number one, are you a covered employer? And number two, do you have any covered employees per the requirement, per the ordinance? And it's all different, so you're going to have to look one by one. So that chart being organized is really, really essential and important. So this concludes video 1 of our series. Continue on to part 2, where we're going to dive into the interaction between contract and citywide labor laws so you can understand which ones to follow in certain circumstances and cases. This is our contact information, and our website is our ultimate and best source for phone numbers, email addresses, and lots of information for our labor laws that we enforce. This is a part of a series. I recommend that you watch the other videos and watch the entire series to really come up with a set of questions before you contact us, because you might have your question answered in some of the future videos here. However, please, as you are going through this process, remember that we are here for you. And if you'd like to reach out to us regarding understanding prevailing wage and MCO and HCAO and navigating among and between contract and citywide labor laws, you can always reach out to us and we will be able to assist you. Now, if you have specific questions regarding one of the labor laws, my advice to you is you need to contact that unit directly and staff will be able to assist you. If you just want general information about navigating among and between contract and citywide labor laws, you can contact the Minimum Compensation and Healthcare Accountability Ordinance Unit. Um, Thank you again for joining me. And we will see you again on our next